I often tell husbands, go be Christ. Go just gently knock on the door. And how many times has he knocked on your heart's door and you've said, yeah, I'm too busy. No, I don't want to do that now. And he just stands there and politely knocks. He is waiting for us to open up our hearts and let him in. So my discipline as a high desire husband is to make sure that my desire is focused only on her, but to do it in such a way that cherishes her heart.
Hey, welcome. This is Family Life Blended, and I'm Ron Deal. This donor-supported podcast helps blended families and those who love them pursue the relationships that matter most. I'm so glad you've joined us in this journey. Welcome to episode number 75, Dancing in the Bedroom, when one of you wants sex more than the other. Okay, I already know the subject of sexuality brings up lots of questions, and I'll bet today's conversation about sexual desire in marriage is not going to answer every one of your questions. So we've made a way for you to be able to send us your questions on this subject or any other. Maybe there's a topic or something you want us to address in a future podcast. You can let us know what that is. Send your questions by email to blendedquestions@familylife.com, or you can call and leave a voice message at 407-826-2606, and we'll try to address your question on an upcoming episode. And yes, I know you didn't get to write that down. That's okay. Just look in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you. You know, I've been trying to get my friend Dr. Michael Seitzman on this podcast for a long time, but he's a busy guy. Probably because he's been doing some cutting-edge research about marital sexuality and the desire for sex, which he's going to share with you today. And he's been creating a new video series that you can watch at home on this important subject. Mike is a pastor, and he's a sex therapist who is passionate about marriage and helping couples grow in their marriage. He leads couples seminars and trains clinicians around the world. He's a licensed professional counselor, a certified sex therapist, and a certified sexual addictions specialist. And like I said, he is one of the foremost authorities in the Christian community talking about sexuality. He and his wife, Karen, have been married since 1985 and have two sons, Josiah and Caleb. You know what? It's Valentine's Day, and someone is probably feeling pressured for sex right about now. So let's talk about it. Here's my conversation with Dr. Michael Seitzman. Mike, thanks for being with me.
Hey, it's always an honor. I appreciate it.
Years ago, if you, like me, got up on a Saturday morning, there was a TV show, Battle of the Sexes, men versus women. And they had all these athletic events, and they would get celebrities and people who had no business being on, this field of competition. And of course, it was men versus women.
Right.
That was the Battle of Sexes.
Yep.
Well, it seems like in marriage, sometimes we have another battle of the sexes, and it relates to desire for sex in the relationship.
Right.
Is this a common thing?
It's common enough that we call it normal. Pretty much all
Which
couples.
Which means it's common, right?
Yes, pretty much all couples do. I've spent over 20 years just researching, studying sexual desire discrepancy in couples. And the latest research that comes in shows only 22% of couples are reporting the similar level of desire, and that's even not spot on. So we've got a lot of couples, the majority of couples, that have a discrepancy in it, and a significant number of those don't just have discrepancy, but have high level of conflict around it.
Yeah.
It is the area of greatest pain when it comes to sexual issues.
I wish somebody would have told me.
That is normal to struggle here.
35 years we've been married. I wish somebody would have really laid it out for us and said, look, one of you is going to have a little higher desire than the other one.
Right.
And there's going to be this battle over how much, how often, who initiates, when they don't initiate.
Right.
And oh, by the way, that's all going to change with time over the seasons of your marriage.
We
This
have
is
couples,
just a common story we hear.
We have couples that switch roles over the
Mm,
course of the marriage. The low desire person becomes the high desire person, and then they may switch back. We have couples that are stuck in the same for the entire course of the marriage. A conflict over sexual issues related to sexual desire is the most common distress area in sex that are brought to those of us who help.
okay, so let's unpack it. Let's
Hmm.
talk in it and around it and
Yep.
through it, and let's try to give our listener a better understanding of their own sexual desire as well
Hmm.
as maybe what's happening in their relationship.
Great.
So, one of the stereotypes, most common assumption as it relates to desire, is that males have a higher desire for sex. They come hungry for
Hmm.
sex more than their wives.
Right.
Generally true, not true?
We argue about what desire actually means. When we look at drive, for example,
Hmm.
yes, men tend to be higher on the drive side. About half of the couples that we are working with are saying the husband has a higher drive. If we do a forced choice, we can see that run as high as 80%.
Mm.
But generally, it's going to be if one has a higher drive, it's going to be the husband. The problem is our culture really tends to focus in on those high drive husbands. And we run between 25 and 30% of couples where the wife is the higher
Yep.
desire individual. And often they feel like something's really wrong,
Yes.
something's really
Yes.
broken because everywhere I look, husbands are always after it, and my husband's not.
Right.
What's wrong with me? What's
Or
wrong with
or if she
him?
goes to a Bible study and sitting with a group of women and
Yep.
they're all saying, "Man, I wish my husband would leave me alone." And she's going, "Oh no, I kind of wish he'd want me more."
Right. I wish he would do what they're saying they don't want.
And maybe
Yes.
there's something wrong with me. And that's the
Right.
last thing you would want anybody, male or female, to think.
to,
Yes?
to personalize it and say something's broken in me, but it's also not particularly helpful when we look and say something is broken in our spouse.
Hmm.
When a high desire husband would look and say, my wife's broken,
Hmm.
because she should want it more. I
You
would
know,
like for her to want it more.
one of the things you taught me years ago that I will never forget, this is very helpful for me in my personal life. And it was
Hmm.
when that higher desire person, which happened to be me at that
Hmm.
season of our marriage relationship, when that person asks or opens the door or creates a bid for connection,
Uh-huh.
and the other person, is not immediately open or slow on the uptake or just says, "Ah, man, not now."
Right.
What do you do with that feeling inside you that there's something is broken in them, or it's that, wait a minute, early on in our relationship, we were mutually after one another.
Right.
You taught me that both husband and wife, man and woman, tend to come in the beginning of a romantic relationship with the same level of energy for a season. And then that begins to wane after about 18 months, somewhere in that
Right.
process. And that was so liberating
Hmm. We
for
actually
me.
talk about it as being two different kinds of desire.
Hmm.
One is the initiating type of desire. That's the I was thinking about being with you and thinking about the fun we're going to have and the connection we'll get from it. And I desire that connection with you. So I initiate the bid. And so that's an initiating type of desire, most traditionally a masculine type of desire, though there are lots of women who are like that as well. And early on in a relationship, during an affair, there are a couple of times in life where both males and females tend to reflect an initiating type of desire. But often a few months into the marriage, definitely by the time that there's a kid, usually,
Mm.
the wife moves into what we call a receptive desire.
Hmm.
And a receptive desire is, I just haven't thought about it in a couple of days. It's not that I'm against it, I'm not opposed to it. Um, it's just not been on my radar because too many other things have been on my radar. And so when the initiating spouse puts out a bid for connection, they have to try it on for size for a bit. And it's
Hmm.
like, well, yeah, if I get the laundry shifted over and the kitchen cleaned up and the kids bathed and put in bed, I think I may have enough energy. And as she's sorting through, is it something that I could do? He's already kind of hurt, wounded, been out of shape, that you didn't jump at the opportunity, that you weren't
Right.
thinking about it 8 times today like I was. And unfortunately, often then he has a human reaction of disappointment or of hurt, but he behaves in a way that by the time she's tried it on and talked herself into it, she looks over at him and thinks, but not with that, not with the way you're behaving.
And now you just really shot
Yeah.
yourself in the foot.
And it kind of cascades. And so, what we invite couples to do is if you're aware of the initiating and receptive type of desire, when the higher drive spouse initiates, to just be patient and wait. And, I spent a lot of time helping couples to figure out how to do that initiation that feels good, that is able to be received. But once you do the initiation, you wait and you wait for the receptive spouse to try it on. And if they say maybe, then the whole point is challenge accepted. Now, now I'm going to work to draw you into it because I know 5 to 10 minutes into the act, once you start to get aroused, once you're aware of your arousal and you view that as a positive experience, what we see is then desire shows up on the stage. And then you'll have, if we just talk about it stereotypically, you'll have a wife say, why don't we do this more often? This is really enjoyable. And he's thinking, yes. And the next morning he rolls over and says, more often? And she's like, what do you mean? We just did that. And he can't figure out what happened. And what happened is she's no longer aroused. So she's not in that desiring stage because his is more of an initiating. His doesn't have to be aroused in order to be ready. If they can understand that's not a deficient type of desire, it's a different kind of desire. And we get to the same place, but with slightly different pathways. Then she doesn't feel like he's hounding me all the time when he's asking. No, he's just initiating those bids. It's okay for me to say no, but can I try it on? Can I maybe move into it knowing that 5 to 10 minutes into it, it's going to be great?
If I could just sum that up for our listeners, it's so very important because it's so easy as the higher desire spouse to just think, okay, I want, but they don't want. I want them, but they don't want me. And really, what you're doing at that point is you're short circuiting their ability to warm up to the idea.
Right.
But let's just cut to the chase there, Mike, because there's something kind of romantic / erotic about the other person wanting you. And if you feel like, well, so you have to warm up to the idea, well, that doesn't really count. I don't give you credit for then being with me, even if we end up being sexual together. What is that in us that want that?
I think it is part of how we are wired intrinsically, that we want to be wanted, we want to be desired, we want to be chosen, we want to be pursued. And I do think that's part of the image of God that's in us. I think it's how we are created to understand Him and our relationship with Him. That I so long to be pursued. I so long to be chosen, to be desired. And God wants to be pursued and desired by us. And He pursues and desires who we are. So I think it's part of what's just created within us to help us understand the nature of our relationship with our Lord, with God.
But we should not let that keep us from being patient with our partners.
So in the book of Revelation, Christ identifies himself as the groom and he's talking to his bride. And he says, behold, I, the groom, stand at the door and knock. I don't stand at the door and pound. I don't stand at the door and whine and moan and complain.
Throw guilt
I
trips.
don't try to bust down the door. I don't threaten to go to the neighbor's house if you don't open the door. I don't stomp away acting like a spoiled 6-year-old. Christ stands there and he just gently, politely knocks. And then you're right. He waits with patience. And he says, if anyone will open the door, I will come in and we will have a sensual feast together. And so he's giving us the imagery of how this works. And I often tell husbands, go be Christ. Go just gently knock on the door. And how many times has he knocked on your heart's door and you've said, yeah, I'm too busy. No, I don't want to do that now. And he just stands there and politely knocks. He is waiting for us to open up our hearts and let him in. So my discipline as a high desire husband is to make sure that my desire is focused only on her, but to do it in such a way that cherishes her heart.
Mhm.
If God turned all of his desire for us, all of that want on us unfiltered, we'd be consumed.
Mm.
So he does it through the person of Christ that softens it and cherishes and allows me to feel drawn by it, of Christ's invitational approach. And that's my discipline as a high drive husband. Then the lower drive individual, their discipline is to be receptive as unto Christ, to draw in, knowing that as that happens, it'll get better. Sometimes I'll say, do you ever have those mornings that you wake up and you think, I don't have time for devotions today? I'm not in the mood for it. I'm too tired. I'm too, yeah. But you choose to do it. You act out of discipline. Then 5 minutes into it, God meets you and it's rich and you're glad that you did it and it's good. Well, this is not that dissimilar,
Yeah.
that I choose to act out of the discipline of it, of what's right, knowing that in a few minutes, this is going to be enjoyable and we will connect and have fun with it.
I don't know how many times my wife said, "Hey, I'm hungry. Let's get something to eat." I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm not really hungry, but I'll go with you.
Right.
And then, she's hungry and picks a restaurant, and we walk in, and the smell, oh, I'm there. Like I just found my appetite.
Brilliant example.
And it's sort of like, yes, if I can just allow myself to
Yep.
lean in to the possibility of this is the lower desire
Right.
partner when the opportunity comes. Lean in, allow yourself to be drawn into the space, and just sort of go with that. Sometimes,
Often.
it turns on. The appetite turns on.
Right, it does. Now, it has to be a safe place.
Yeah,
if
sure.
you walked into an unsafe
Oh, sure.
restaurant,
Right.
the desire's not going to kick in.
Right.
And many times, the high desire spouse sets up an unsafe place to say yes or to say no.
And real quick, how would they do that?
Often with the moods, they emotionally punish if you say no.
Okay.
That they act all icky, as my favorite diagnostic term. They act
Yes,
icky.
that's a clinical word,
Yes,
isn't it?
it is. And I listened to a husband describe how his wife behaves when he says no, and I think, yeah, I wouldn't want to have sex with that either. Or I listened to a wife describe how her husband behaves when she says no to him, and I think, yeah, why would anybody ever want to connect with you? But if the couple can keep the focus on what is this about, it's about that deep, intimate connection that we only share with each other, and if we engage in it, it can be really rich and enjoyable. But that comes out of discipline. And we want the passion in sex to be out of our biology, that you're just hungry for me. But that's not very real in longer term relationships, especially. The greatest passion in marriage comes out of the discipline of choosing to pursue you, of choosing to invite you, of choosing to engage, whether we're high or low desire.
And listener, please don't miss this. There is a discipline on both sides, no matter
Correct.
whether you're the higher desire or the lower. If you're higher, you got to come gentle and patient,
Right.
and trust. Don't punish. Trust that the other person at times will find their way towards you, and there'll be a connection opportunity.
Right.
Lower desire person, discipline towards just maybe allowing yourself to lean into that space, even though you don't quite have the appetite. Trust that something may develop there.
Right.
And none of this means somebody can't say no, right?
Well, in a healthy marriage, that's true. In an unhealthy marriage, no becomes not acceptable. And many times I think in the church, there's this subtle message that no is unacceptable. And the problem is that's highly destructive. It assumes that the high drive person can't manage their desire. It assumes that the low person exists to manage the high desire person's
Okay, wait.
drive.
I know where you're going with that, but we need to unpack it because, in other words, if the message is, now wait a minute, that's not your body, 1 Corinthians 7, your body belongs to them and their body belongs to you. And so if you have an appetite or a hunger for sex and the other person owes it to you, that you sort of don't have a choice there.
Right.
And you're saying the way we teach it most of the time sends the message that it's your job to care for the other person's desire. You've
Right.
got to satisfy that for them because they're not able to handle it themselves.
What a selfish way to look at such an intimate
Yes.
behavior. That is not how Christ works with us.
Hmm.
Christ is always invitational with us. He doesn't stand and demand. I don't see anywhere in Scripture he does. So
Right.
for me to take that approach is contrary to the whole of Scripture. But it's even contrary to that particular Scripture where Paul is talking there and he says, the goal is for you to submit to one another, to care
Yeah.
for one another. Not that one has a more legitimate need than the other. And he starts that passage by saying, because you're so sexually undisciplined, is the whole reason he's even talking about this.
Hmm.
Because you're sexually undisciplined, you need to focus in and care for and serve one another, is what he's saying. And he finishes that whole passage by saying, this is a concession, not a command. And I rarely hear that preached about when people pull this passage out, that Paul himself is saying this is a concession because you lack sexual discipline.
Wow.
It's not even a command. The goal is for you to serve one another. Well, if her desire is lower, his way of serving her is cherishing her and creating an environment that she would want to step into. Instead, often we give a just
Guilt trip.
overall,
Beat them up because they're not there for you right when you want them.
because it's all about one person serving and meeting the desires of one person. We talk about it as a need, which is rubbish, but it's serving the desires of one person over the other, and that's not how Scripture works.
So ironic that that passage is about serving one another, and we make it about my need and you
Yes.
fulfilling my
Right.
need. Wow, that's indicting. And
We can do
shouldn't
better
that.
as a church.
Yeah.
We can reflect Him a lot
Yeah.
better than that.
And so the takeaway for our listeners, husbands and wives, is no, don't have that heart of demand or forcing or being overly critical, or if you're the higher desire, gently approaching, trying to create a climate where it's more likely that they'll want to move it. Safety is primary.
It is, and so one of the the words that I really like to use, I get a lot of pushback on, but I love the word seduction, and people talk about how seduction is negative, that we're trying to get somebody to do something that they don't want to do, but the reality of it is seduction is a two-way street. You know, if somebody comes up and tries to seduce me, if I'm not open to them, the seduction's not going to work. Um, I invite couples to really work hard at living seductively. When we first meet and we decide, I really like you, we behave in our best. To me, that's seductive behavior. I'm always trying to draw you to me. I'm always trying to attract you to me. And then we get married and we look at our spouse and we say, yeah, well, accept me for who I am. This is how I am. No, I don't always dress nicely. No, I don't always, I don't always smell good. And that's not seductive. And I think, why do we tolerate that in ourselves? We have just told this person at the altar, you are going to be the most important person in my life. And I'm going to look at him and say, but I don't have to be my best for you. That's broken. That's wrong. What if we chose to live seductively day after day, minute after minute, that I am seeking to be my best? I'm seeking not to be an unreal person, but I'm seeking to be somebody that draws you to me, that you want to be with me. If I've been living seductively, and that may mean I spend time just telling you how much I enjoy you. It may mean that I spend time just asking you how your day is or what's going on in your heart. It may be that I spend time just walking to the park with you, um, playing with you. Those kind of behaviors and attitudes, that stance of being, allows our spouse to be more receptive when we do spark the sexual event, when we initiate with them. And it's, yeah, I kind of like being with you. We could try that. Instead, we tend to live very unseductively, and then we can't figure out why our bid for connection they have to work on. And I think we can do better than that. I think God is always drawing us, always wooing, always inviting us.
Yeah.
And so we just have to reflect who He is.
I want us to talk a little bit about maybe an extreme circumstance. When one's higher desire, one's lower, and you're just trying to find each other. Yeah, that's really normal. There are some couples who get stuck
and
Right.
they just can't find their way into their sexual relationship.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, the higher desire person, maybe trying to be gentle and patient and all of that, and there's no fruit that's
Mm-hmm.
born out of that. Those are tough situations. I know we
They are.
can't unpack all of that,
Mm-hmm.
but is there a word or two that you would offer somebody listening who's maybe in that situation?
It is really tough, and those are often sad stories because they try to deal with it and it explodes, it escalates.
Mhm.
And I love you, I care for you, I don't want to get engaged in a fight, so I back away from it. And we don't talk about it for a couple of months, but the sexual activity drops a half step. And then we try to talk about it again and it escalates. And so we back away from it for 3 months and the sexual activity drops another half step. And what we are finding is that anywhere from 25 to 30% of married couples right now are living in sexless marriages,
And sexless is usually defined as
less
sex.
than once a month.
Yep. Okay.
And so it may about half of those are never, and
Mhm.
about half of them is highly infrequent.
Mm.
And many times it's because it's become such an explosive issue that they don't even know how to deal with it. And what we've learned is being able to come to the table, craft a vision, and start talking through it really helps. But that requires them working through some of the
Mm.
woundedness that
Mhm.
both have experienced.
Mhm.
The high drive is often feeling real rejection. The low desire is often feeling like you believe something's wrong with me. And generally, those couples are going to need a coach. They're going to need a mentor. They're going to need somebody to sit with them to keep them at the table and help them to kind of sort through it.
Mhm. Okay, so a good word for them. You know, we're going to link to a new video series that
Mm-hmm.
you've put together about marital sexuality in
Right.
our show notes. We'll let our listener know how they can get in touch with that. One of the interesting things you've learned is that it seems like things are changing a little bit with men and women and desire. That did I get that right? That the level of desire in women, generally speaking, is coming up,
It
and
seems to
that
be.
men and women are not as far apart as we sometimes think we are.
Well, we're not sure if that's a shift over time or if it's just our increased understanding of things like receptive desire,
Mm.
where we are realizing. But when we ask husbands and wives how frequently you would like to engage in sexual activity with your spouse, we give them a range of about 10 different options that
Mm.
go from never all the way up to more than once a day. And then we can do the research and data crunching it all to figure it out. And what we find is that 22% of the time, the couples give the same answer.
Mm.
And maybe once a month, it may be multiple times a day, but they're giving the same answer. And then we look and separate that out so we know if the wife is asking for more, if the husband's asking for more. And we get 27% of the time the wife is asking for more than what the husband is.
Mhm.
So we got about 52% of the husbands asking for more. But then we look at how far apart they are.
Mm.
And they are not very far apart, often only one more encounter
Mm.
apart. And couples are often really surprised at that. The way it plays out in my office is a couple comes in and sits down, and I say, how often, if it were totally up to you, would you like to be sexual with your spouse? And the wives will often look and say, oh, 1 to 2 times a week.
Mm.
And the husband says, 2 to 3 times a week. And I point out, there's not much difference between two and two.
Yeah.
There just really isn't. So he's on the higher end of that and she's on the lower end of it. The problem is if couples aren't talking about it, if they're not leaning in, if they're
Mm.
not caring for each other, they begin to polarize.
Mhm.
And the higher drive starts to blame the lower drive and it gets icky and they
Yes.
move further apart.
Yeah.
But when they step back and look at what would they really like, husbands and wives aren't that different. The other thing we see though is when we ask them how often are you engaging, if a couple is a healthy couple, they're going to really agree on what that frequency is.
Mm.
If they're unhealthy, there'll be more disagreement on what the actual frequency is. But even then, the takeaway is that neither the high drive or the low drive are getting as much sex as what they want.
Mm.
The takeaway is nobody's getting what they would like.
Mm.
And when couples realize that, if we take a stereotypical husband being the high drive, he look, and I ask the question, "What would you like?" And he hears her say 1 to 2 times a week. He looks over and says, "Really, really? How come how come it's only?" And I interrupt him at that point and say, that curiosity that you have right there, she doesn't hear at home. She hears criticism
Yes.
at home. You were just curious and saying, wait, really? You want that? And your next question is going to be, why don't we? That's the question that will make a difference. Not why don't you? Why don't we?
It's different.
And it's a huge difference because now the couple can move to the same side of the table. Okay, maybe he wants it 3 times a week and maybe I want it once a week, but we're only having it once every 10 days. What's getting in the way that keeps either of us from getting what we want?
I think the irony for some couples, Michael, is that one of them has already made a determination about it. Well, I'm the one who initiates the 2 times a week,
Right.
and you don't initiate. So that means you don't ever want sex, which means you really don't want me, which means you really don't want us. And
Right.
now my insecurities are really bubbling to the surface in the form of criticism and judgment and
Yes.
assumptions. And so, because all of that is true, at least it is in my head, I'm now not open to the idea that you want sex at all. And so it's totally surprising when he hears or she hears that the other wants twice a week. It's sort of like, whoa. Well, what needs to be adjusted is my assumptions, my
Right.
my negative thoughts about you, and the fact that I was pressuring and not gentle and patient. And I love this curiosity thing. Getting curious about you, the other person, about us, and what's going on with you and what your interests are. Sounds like that's an important discipline couples need to
I
learn.
think it's a core part of a healthy marriage of being able to be curious about each other because we can't be curious and contemptuous at the same time. I can't be curious and critical at the same time. And when I learn what it feels like to be curious and I keep myself there, then we start to move forward. And many times my question in therapy is, what if? What if what you just heard from your spouse is true? What if they're not lying to you? What does that mean? And you watch people shift to, well, how can it be true? Now, that's a curious question. That's a very different, how can we connect more than what we do? It's very different than what's wrong with you that we don't connect more
Yeah.
than what we do.
Yeah.
And now they're on the same page and they're pursuing a similar vision. And it may be because you make me feel like I'm broken all the time. I don't want to show up to the game if I'm going to lose at the start.
Okay, so let's wrap back to something we talked about at the beginning. And I'm thinking of a listener who is in a midlife. There's lots of blended family couples who start their journey together in midlife. And one of the things we know about low desire partners, stereotypically women, but not always, is that sometimes they come into themselves in
Yes.
middle age. And they get more comfortable in their own skin with their own sexuality, and they kind of find who they are. And all of a sudden, there's some midlife people who come alive
Right.
in their sex life to the surprise, perhaps, of their partner, right?
Yes. Yep.
And the tables are turned sometimes on this desire thing.
Sometimes the tables are turned. Sometimes it's just a whoa. I thought we had gotten into kind of a comfortable pattern for both of us, and you're just turning up the heat. We don't always understand it, and sometimes it comes from a variety of different issues and maybe biological shifts that are going on. We see. In the overall data, we see a peak of sexual activity in the 30 to 35 years marriage range. And we step back and look at it and go, well, that's curious. Is it because the kids have just left the home? Is it because biological shifts? Is it because I'm finally learning to accept my body? One wife said, I've spent 30 years trying to make it different. It is what it is. And I'm learning that he's really happy with the way it is. And that freed her to engage more. So I think it happens for a number of different issues. And what I tell couples is just embrace it, accept it, play with it, and go, well, I don't know what that's about, but let's lean into it and have fun.
One of the things I love about how God designed sex is that fundamentally it is about being known and knowing
Yes.
the other person.
Mhm.
You could give us a great lecture on yada and Hebrew,
Right. Yeah,
and
that's the
how
word that he used for it.
that is the word,
Mhm.
and it's about being known. And of course,
Mhm.
you put that into spiritual language, and God desperately wants to know us. He already does know us.
Right.
He just wants us to know Him and to move toward Him. And so, He built into our physiology the ability to experience physically what we
Mhm.
can't experience spiritually with Him. So there's this
Right.
whole echo of the
Rich echo.
Trinity and how much they love us and all
Yes.
of that in our
And
sexual being.
I really believe that sex, as it is, was given as God's object lesson to
Hmm.
teach us about what it takes to pursue, what it takes to receive, what it's like when we step into that act of worship that is really rich, and we're
Hmm.
connected, and we're one, and we reflect something of Him that we don't at any other time in any other activity.
And in our fallen world, to move toward naked and unashamed means
Mhm.
I have to deal with something in me that is ashamed.
The beauty of sex is it requires me to have a healthy relationship with myself, you to have a
Yes.
healthy relationship with yourself, and us to have a healthy relationship with each other in order for it to be great. And as we pursue a vision for it, it pushes all of those arenas. And the moment I shift into criticism, I am becoming a victim in this process. I'm saying, until you change, I can't be okay.
Hmm.
And that never works. As long as I keep a focus on how do I continue to grow and how do we continue to grow, then we grow together, and it becomes a rich process.
So, in effect, sex not only is a picture of who God is and the
Hmm.
nature of our relationship with Him, a window into
Correct.
spiritual things, it's also, I think, an opportunity for healing and growth.
It is. I would almost put it in terms of it is also a discipleship tool. That
Hmm.
as we continue to figure out how do we grow this and make it richer, we have to learn internal processes. And the discipline of me surrendering to self, of not demanding that it be not my way, of leaning in and being curious about who you are, of being gracious, all of those Christ-like attributes. We have to learn to reflect in order for it to be truly rich and truly great. If it's just about a physical activity, you know, then it gets shallow, and we're hungry for something different very quickly. If it's about pursuing the heart of intimacy with each other, there's no way to totally ever plumb the depths of it as we continue to grow internally and with each other.
Okay, so we've kind of walked all around this desire thing, talked it in and out. If we put it all together, what would it look like?
You've been listening to my conversation with Michael Seitzman. I'm Ron Deal, and this is Family Life Blended. Believe me, you want to hear Mike's response to that question. Hang on, we'll get there in a minute. But first, if this conversation ministered to you, I want to encourage you to check out 2 other episodes that we did on the topic of sexuality, both of them with Dr. Julie Slattery. Number 66, A Healthy Sex Life, What Couples Should Know, and episode number 30, we called it Resex, The Challenges of Sex for Blended Family Couples. You can also check out my book, The Smart Step Family Marriage, co-authored with Dr. David Olson. We surveyed over 50,000 couples and captured what best predicts healthy marriages in blended families, and that includes a whole chapter on the topic of sexuality. Get a copy of The Smart Step Family Marriage today. And if you want to know more about Mike and his new video series, look at our show notes or visit the Family Life Blended podcast page at familylife.com/blended podcast. And hey, if you haven't subscribed to this podcast yet, you can do that wherever you get your podcasts. And if you haven't left us a review or a rating, please do. That helps other people find us. You know, you obviously are invested in having a stronger marriage, or you wouldn't be listening to this podcast at all. I want you to know that each spring we put on a worldwide 1-day live stream marriage seminar for step family couples called Blended and Blessed. It's designed just for you. and it's fresh material every year. An all-new Blended and Blessed will take place live in Houston, Texas on Saturday, April 2nd, 2022. If you live within driving distance, you can join us for the live event, or you can just view it online from anywhere in the world, and it will be translated into Spanish in real time. Now, here's the cool part. Churches can host the event and bring blended family couples together, even if it's just virtually. You can bring people together to build a ministry in your community. Just go to blendedandblessed.com to learn all about it. That's blendedandblessed.com. Okay, let's hear how Michael would sum up our conversation and pull it all together.
I think of an example of one of my clients. He sat across from me with his wife. He says, we've been working hard on this for a little while now. And he says, at 74, I am having the best sex of my life. He said, at 74, my parts don't always show up for the party. He says, but that's okay. At 74, my wife can't always manage the parts, even if they do. And he said, it's really great when both of our parts work well, but it's fine when they don't, because I've learned that it's not just about my parts. It's not just about hers. It's about our heart. It's about intimacy. It's about leaning into just celebrating each other, being curious about each other, playing with each other. And they have shifted from arguing about how frequent and who does what and what behaviors are done to where they're both bringing to the bed things that the other likes, because now it's enjoyable and it's playful, because it's no longer about the act. It's now about the deep, intimate connection that they have with each other. And he said, I wish I could have learned this kind of sex when I was 30. And I said, no offense, but you were too stuck on yourself and what you demanded at 30. And she was trying to figure out how to manage you, not connect with you. Today at 70, you're able to be surrendered, truly, richly love your wife. And in return, she's truly choosing and opening up and being free with you. And you guys are experiencing the best sex of your life because it's now rich and intimate. And I think that's what God invites us to pursue. That's the vision that he gives for us.
Next time, we're going to hear from Dr. Greg Smalley about moving from roommates in marriage to soulmates.
We need at least 10 minutes a day exploring the inner life. In other words, the emotions, the fears, the anxieties, the dreams, the good.
That's Dr. Greg Smalley next time on Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. Thanks for listening, and thank you so much to our monthly donors who make this podcast possible. If you'd like to join the Family Life Partner Program or just say thank you with a donation, look in the show notes for a donation link. Believe me, every dollar counts. Our producer is Marcus Holt, mastering engineer Jarrett Roski, project coordinator Ann Encaro, and theme music composed and performed by Braden Deal. Family Life Blended is part of the Family Life Podcast Network, helping you pursue the relationships that matter most.